Johnny English Strikes Again is the third entry in the now long-running series starring Rowan Atkinson. Now, I'm a big fan of Rowan Atkinson and his previous works. I love Blackadder, and I was a part of that wave of kids that grew up on Mr. Bean. However, the Johnny English films have been pretty hit or miss for me. The first film was a fairly enjoyable spy spoof with some big talent that infused some of the Mr. Bean style of comedy. However, the second film was just a very by-the-numbers generic James Bond parody that really wasn't trying to be anything else. This third film, directed by David Kerr, fits somewhere in the middle, where there isn't much of an attempt to be anything more than a by-the-numbers James Bond parody, but comes closer to being Mr. Bean in a spy movie, where some of the biggest laughs of the film come from Rowan Atkinson acting like his most popular character. This film follows Johnny as he's called into action after a series of cyber attacks threatens England's security, and he's the only agent available to get the job done. His friend Boff returns from the first film to help investigate who is launching these cyber attacks, and stop them before the G12 summit that the Prime Minister is attending. The plot is very predictable, with a villain that wouldn't seem out of place in the last Jason Bourne film, because if you're like me, the Silicon Valley-esque type villain that we've seen play out in the last few years have really run their course. It seems the easy answer studios had to shaking up villains was, oh, just make them like Mark Zuckerberg. And I think now we're all ready for something else, especially since The Social Network came out 8 years ago. Surely we can think of something else. There are some big laughs in the movie, although they are quite infrequent, as the movie decides that telling the generic spy plot is more important than consistent laughs, which is a problem that the previous Johnny English films have had. There is a particularly funny scene, however, featuring Johnny English as a waiter, which is the most I've seen this character acting like Mr. Bean. What disappoints me the most about Johnny English is there isn't really any attempt to be anything more than a very average James Bond spoof, where we again go through the routine of being a parody of Goldfinger's structure. What I love about, say, Austin Powers is that those films are all about subverting the 60s and 70s Bond films, while completely satirizing the more ridiculous elements of those Bond films, which led to the storylines being completely meta while taking on a life of their own, giving us characters that we now know and love even though they started out as parodies. This is why I think Austin Powers is perhaps remembered more fondly, and as a result will be more timeless than the Johnny English films, as the Austin Powers films completely owned what they were and went for the absurd. Johnny English doesn't have the same drive, and it really doesn't help that the films have been released so infrequently. First film came out in 2003, the second in 2011, and now only in 2018 are we getting the third film. Really, these films should have followed the Austin Powers model of releasing every 2 to 3 years, as by 2018 I don't think a lot of people were really clamoring for a third Johnny English film, and yet whenever Mike Myers appears on a talk show, everyone just wants to know when Austin Powers 4 is coming out. Because the long absence between movies hasn't exactly translated to better written jokes or bigger success at the box office for Johnny English. The performances in Johnny English Strikes Again, however, are all quite good, with high-class performers like Emma Thompson bringing that effortless talent that you'd expect of an actress of that caliber. Her role as the Prime Minister, however, feels a little short-handed, as if perhaps some of her scenes were left on the cutting room floor. Regardless, more Emma Thompson in this film would have been a huge bonus. The film brings all the luxury you expect of James Bond, with the fast cars and exotic locations, leaving it to be quite a good-looking film, despite some iffy green screen work and CG shots in parts. Ex-Bond girl Olga Kurylenko seems to be having a pretty fun time acting opposite Rowan Atkinson as the Russian spy Ophelia. There are some fun interactions during a humorous dance sequence, and particularly in the film's third act, where I'm sure they would have had a lot of trouble keeping a straight face. The attempts at making Ophelia feel more than a generic Russian spy are definitely appreciated here, but whenever it feels like you're getting further with the character, the film reminds you that this movie is called Johnny English, and the rest of the attention stays with Rowan Atkinson. Although there is one standout sequence involving Johnny English walking around in VR. Who knows if we'll get a fourth Johnny English film? Judging by the track record, we may have to wait another 7 or 8 years for another attempt, but I think many of us will have moved on, or be ready for Rowan Atkinson to give Mr. Bean one last hurrah on the big screen. If they do make a fourth film, I hope they spend more time on making the jokes more frequent and consistently funny, while hopefully evolving past just being another by-the-numbers James Bond parody. Fourth time's the charm, maybe? If you're a long-time Rowan Atkinson fan, give this a go, absolutely. Otherwise, if you have not seen any of the films, or you're unfamiliar with the character of Johnny English, maybe skip this version, and go visit some of Rowan Atkinson's more beloved works. Johnny English Strikes Again gets a 5.8 out of 10 for me. Guys, I hope you like this review. If you want to see more reviews just like this one, stay right here for your mono fix. Bye guys.